It's election day. Voters are writing the final chapter of this historic presidential election in America. Long lines of voters holding mugs of coffee and scrolling through their phones seem to move swiftly, relieving fears of long wait times. A record number of early voters is a crucial sign in itself. Nearly 100 million Americans had cast the ballot before the voting day began. That makes 47% of the registered voters nationwide. Let's bring you up to speed with what the two main contenders have been up to today. Donald Trump and Joe Biden both foregoing traditional election day photo ops at the polls on election day. Both the candidates and their families decided to vote early. Voters on both sides of the nation's widening political divide are prepared to render a verdict on the future of the White House. With the historic early voting record, citizens have already sent out a strong message displaying their determination to get their voices heard. The battleground states of Michigan and Pennsylvania have been making news on the eve of the election for setting one-day records for new Wuhan virus cases. Let's take you straight to my colleague Susan Tehrani, who's joining us from New York. Susan, what's it like on election day?
Yeah, Palki, as you mentioned, 100 million Americans cast their ballots even before November 3rd began. A great day for American democracy, but also an indication of how strong voters feel about their candidate. Now, one thing's for sure, we know that usually early voters, historically, they're already pretty much decided. Either they're Democrat or Republican. They go to the votes early. It doesn't really matter what happens during the last days of the election. However, this year has been significantly different. As you mentioned, the China virus, COVID-19, coronavirus, what you choose to call it, these have been really serious issues for people to be able to really take part in this part of American democracy and either cast their ballots by mail or think that they'll be preventing long lines during November 3rd and really want to have their voices heard. So that's why I think we see a lot of surge in early voting as compared to other years. I do want to let you know that this is a local polling station in the Upper East Side of New York. It was not open for early voting. We were at a polling station that was open for early voting earlier, and there wasn't really much of a crowd. This is one that usually opens up on November 3rd. There's usually a line from here to across around the block every year. This is a demonstration, perhaps, and a snapshot of a blue state like New York, where people have already cast their ballots, made up their minds, know who they want president, and are staying home on November 3rd.
Well, they're staying home on November 3rd, and New York also, in fact, saw some of the worst violence over this summer. And we saw images from New York earlier today of shops and storefronts being boarded up. Do you see extra police deployment? Have people who you've spoken to expressed fears that there might be unrest in the event of an unclear result?
Yeah. I was actually in Soho last night, one of the hubs of shopping here in New York City, usually bustling with people, even during the coronavirus pandemic post-lockdown. And the stores were being, shut. They were being closed. They closed sooner than normal, and they had wood basically on their windows piled up. And I talked to some of the store owners, and they said exactly what you're saying, that because of the unrest that we saw during the summer months, now we know what people are capable of doing if they don't like the status quo. And we saw looting, we saw violence. That was regarding social justice issues, regarding what was happening in the United States. But then now we have an election that people are very opinionated about. And so, while some say that people are worried about one side inciting violence, saying that Donald Trump is really trying to tell its supporters to go out and rebel, we haven't really seen that. What we've usually seen is from the other side, and these shop owners know that what perhaps looters in the summer are capable of doing, and they might come out again this time if they don't like the results of the election. But yeah, a lot of security. The NYPD has been on high alert, not just in America, not just in New York, but across the United States as well. Police has had a major presence. We haven't seen a lot in the streets yet, but we'll have to see as the day passes and we get closer to the closing of the elections.
I'm going to request you to stay with me, Susan. I'll come back to you for one more question. Joining me from Washington, D.C. is Ray Locker. He's a senior journalist. Ray Locker, welcome back to WION. We just heard from the president. I was just speaking to my colleague Susan there in New York, who's saying that there are serious concerns of law and order issues. Donald Trump spoke just a short while back, and he did not ease any of those concerns because he said losing is very difficult, especially for me, and I'm not prepared a speech to concede this election. Do you think it'll come to that?
Well, I think he's going to lose. I think the polls have showed for a long time that he's going to lose. I think what most people are in the United States, certainly my colleagues in political journalism, are afraid of is what happened 4 years ago when we thought he was going to lose then and he didn't. So everybody's kind of holding back on their predictions, but he's never been above 50% approval since he's been president. The polls have remained fairly consistent nationally, some tightening in some states, but Joe Biden is winning in a lot of the states that Trump won 4 years ago. So it doesn't really look good for Donald Trump right now, but he surprised people before, and everybody remembers that.
Susan, the best part of covering an election is to be able to talk to people and see what the mood is like. I see that the street behind you is largely deserted, but the people you've spoken to, are they excited about this election? Have they already sort of given up? Whatever happens, happens, because this has been a very, very difficult, divisive, violent, dramatic election in America. Are people still excited about finding out who makes it to the White House?
Yeah, everyone's holding their breath. There is a lot of excitement. There's a lot of anxiety and concern because both sides, as you mentioned, we have a very polarized country right now. Both sides really want their candidate to win. There are major issues at stake. Joe Biden likes to say that, the soul of America is at stake. Well, perhaps, but then they're moving past that romanticism, so to say. Then there are other issues regarding the Supreme Court, Senate, Congress, and what's to come in years after this presidential election is really on the table right now. So people are voting for their future. They're excited. They talk about not making guesses prematurely. And one thing that we've heard time and time again from experts is we will probably see the outcomes coming in early in favor of Joe Biden, because usually Democrats vote early, they vote by mail. That's what we hear. But then later on, we will probably see a surge in Donald Trump voters and counts as the days and nights, as the night proceeds, when, the results of in-person voting is also counted as well. But everyone's watching. As my colleague mentioned to you earlier, we all know what could happen. Expectations are pretty high right now. It could go either way. But one thing about Donald Trump, he does make an exceptional closing. That's for sure. I mean, we saw that in 2016. We saw that now. He drew a lot of crowds in Pennsylvania. That was interesting to watch, but we'll see what America decides. Yes, everyone's watching closely.
Indeed, we will. Susan Tehrani, thanks very much for your relentless coverage of this election here. We've had more than 100 hours of coverage of the U.S. election on this channel, and a lot of it is thanks to you. So thanks very much for joining us right now. There is a tremendous amount of interest, Ray Locker, in what happens in America. And people in India have picked sides, and there are people who support Donald Trump on social media. It's a pity they don't have a vote, or he would have gone to the White House straight. What happens in the U.S. impacts, of course, the rest of the world. And Donald Trump likes to talk about his foreign policy win, but that doesn't seem to be on the top of the voters' mind, would you say?
No, I think voters in this country, by and large, are exhausted by 4 years of Donald Trump as president, and they're looking for some kind of relief. Like I said earlier, he's never cleared 50% approval rating ever since he got elected. And people 2 years ago voted in the midterms overwhelmingly for his Democratic opposition. So, I think he is the issue. Nobody is talking about, differences on budget policy and trade issues. He's the overwhelming issue, along with the COVID-19 pandemic, which, we are up to like 220,000 plus who have died. We're clearing 100,000 new cases every day. So those two things, Donald Trump and the pandemic, are the main issues here.
No prizes for guessing who you're voting for or who you voted for, the way you put it. Donald Trump and COVID-19 are the biggest issues in this election. Stay with us, Ray Locker. I want to play out for our viewers what the president said just a short while back. He visited the Republican Party headquarters in Virginia. It was the president's first public appearance on Election Day. He sounded upbeat about his chances. He said people loved his large campaign rallies. He took on the press once again, saying they can check and fact check whatever he's saying. His attack on mail-in voting continued. He sounded like a man still campaigning. Listen in to the U.S. president.
I hear we're doing very well in Florida. We're doing very well in Arizona. We're doing incredibly well in Texas. I'm hearing we're doing well all over. I hear the lines are amazing. The lines have been amazing. And I think we're going to have a great night. We're going to have a great night. And we're going to have, much more importantly, we're going to have a great 4 years. But I want to thank everybody. It's a tremendous group of people. Come on over here. This is the media. They're very nice. They treat us as Come on over. Kaylee, everybody, come on over. Young, attractive people that know politics. And someday, some of the people in this room, I predict, some of them will be president, I hope. But they've been working very hard. And I know you'll be here all night. And I think you're going to see some tremendous results. The whole world is waiting. This country is waiting, but the whole world is waiting. And a lot of shenanigans, a lot of bad things happen with ballots when you say, oh, let's devote days and days, and all of a sudden the ballot count changes. And you take a look at Philadelphia, the history of Philadelphia politics. No, I don't put people on their honor code. I don't think it's right. And I think it's a very dangerous thing that they've done with that decision. And maybe their wisdom will change that decision, or maybe we'll go back and give them a right to change it. But it's a very dangerous decision for this country, what they did with Pennsylvania and some others also. You have to have a date. And the date happens to be November 3rd. And we should be entitled to know who won on November 3rd. And if somebody comes along and puts a ballot in way late, they shouldn't be. They should put the ballot in earlier. There's no reason why they can't put the ballot in 2 weeks earlier or 1 week earlier. I think it's a very dangerous decision for our country. In many ways, dangerous, in many ways.
That's Donald Trump for you. We've also heard from some voters. There's a lot riding on the average American voter. Their choice will have implications on the rest of the world for the next 4 years. Let's go to New York once again and see how voters are planning to make this difficult choice.
It is so important to me. I realize I'm in a very blue state, so in that sense, my vote doesn't feel like as big as if I was in Pennsylvania or Virginia. But it's just a good habit to get into. It's really, something that we owe to previous generations before us that worked really hard to make our vote matter and to let us, be able to vote. And the election, last election hit me pretty hard. Being so close to potentially seeing a female president was such a big deal. And this is just, I'm hoping this is a better turnout. I'm hoping that the polls are a little bit more accurate and calibrating for any inaccuracies, but this is huge. I grew up in a very Republican family, and it was what it is, but I'm really excited to be voting Democrat and just kind of being a change than previous generations before me.
Ray Locker, taking forward from where we left, you said that this election is about Donald Trump and very little less, perhaps the pandemic too. By that logic, would it be fair to say that it doesn't matter who would have stood against him? This is not about Joe Biden at all. And if he wins, he'll win only because he is not Donald Trump, not because he's Joe Biden.
Well, I think some people thought that earlier, but as the campaign has gone on, we've actually seen Joe Biden's approval ratings rise over the last few months, where he's probably about 10 points net positive in approval, disapproval, whereas Donald Trump is probably about 10 points net negative approval, disapproval. So earlier on, it looked like Joe Biden was kind of an elderly figure of the past who was kind of a stand-in and got the nomination based on his record with various constituencies in the Democratic Party. But I think he's risen to the occasion and done better, and I think the polls show that. Meanwhile, President Trump has pretty much been consistent approval, disapproval throughout his presidency. Some people, as we've seen with these public events, really love him, and a lot of people really don't. And so it's all about turnout. And I think, given the turnout numbers we've seen in early voting and on Election Day, I don't think people who are really enthusiastic about the incumbent turn out in such great numbers to vote for him again. I think what we're seeing is in places like Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, it's more of an anti-Trump vote. So a combination of both, rising enthusiasm for Joe Biden plus a strong anti-Trump vote. And then the challenge is after, the votes are counted is how does the winner, whoever it may be, assemble a winning coalition to actually get things done in Washington.
Final question to you, and this is a question I'm asking all the people who are joining me tonight. Do you think the result will be decided in court and not at a counting booth?
No, I think it's going to be decided at a counting booth. I don't think it's going to the Supreme Court.
That's very good to know. Ray Locker, thanks very much for joining us here on Beyond. We also have with us Voice of America's White House correspondent Patsy Widakusevara, bringing us the very latest from Washington, D.C.
So this is something that both sides are quite concerned about. Post-election litigation is definite because right now there's already hundreds of lawsuits around the country, talking about how ballots should be distributed, how ballots should be counted. These are all already going on. Now, the concern about post-election friction and violence is certainly a big concern, particularly because the president, as we know a couple of weeks ago, has refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power and has several times signaled to his supporters that unless he is declared the winner, the election is rigged, and not accept the results of the election. So these are, of course, concerning to everybody. As far as I've heard from election officials, local election officials, as well as local law enforcement, they're really bracing up and trying to make sure that everybody can vote safely and that the votes can be counted safely.
And Beyond's correspondent Sarah Walton is in Florida tracking this very important battleground state. Let's go straight to her for the very latest from there.
There's a very big chance of that because of the large number of electoral votes that Florida, a swing state, holds 29 of those electoral votes. And actually what we're seeing on the ground here in Tallahassee, where I am today, is a sort of steady stream of voters turning up, but none of the long queues actually that were predicted or that were seen during early voting. There's a sort of people coming in ones and twos through the morning. I think there's a good chance that is because of the sheer numbers of people who have already voted. You mentioned 100 million Americans across the country, but even here in Florida, there's about 9 million Floridians, which is 63% of registered voters in Florida, who have already used either an early voting day or have sent a mail-in ballot. And what's interesting about the results there is that while Democrats are, seen to normally be more likely to vote early, and they did indeed have an early lead in that early voting tally, Republicans have been slowly catching up, and it's now a very narrow margin between the number of vote casts between registered Democrats and registered Republicans. And so that means turnout today on the final election day could be very important. If there is a large turnout of registered Republican voters, which is what some pollsters have predicted, it could be a sign that this state is leaning towards re-electing President Trump. But a big caveat here, we should mention that just because we know who a voter has registered their affiliation for in the past, doesn't mean they will necessarily cast their vote for that party here today. it's very hard to get a clear steer on what we can read out of those early voting figures. So really, it is all still to play for here in Florida.